America's history books tell a very specific story. They start with European explorers discovering an empty continent, then skip to colonization, revolution, and westward expansion. But what if that story is missing entire chapters? What if there were black kingdoms and civilizations right here in America, complex societies with their own governments, economies, and cultures that have been systematically erased from our collective memory? This isn't about conspiracy theories. This is about how history gets written by the winners. When you control the textbooks, the museums, and the archaeological funding, you get to decide what's important enough to remember and what's convenient to forget. And for centuries, it's been very convenient to forget that black people built sovereign nations on this soil long before and after European arrival. We're going to uncover 3 of these lost civilizations: the ancient earthworks of the Mound Builders and the controversial evidence of pre-Columbian African contact, the Republic of New Africa, a modern black nation that the government crushed with tanks, and the forgotten black towns that created pockets of sovereignty during Reconstruction. This is the history they don't want you to know, because knowledge of past sovereignty changes everything about present possibilities. Long before Columbus sailed, sophisticated civilizations were building massive earthworks across North America. The so-called Mound Builders constructed pyramids, geometric enclosures, and complex cities that rivaled those in Mesoamerica. But mainstream archaeology has largely treated these sites as mysterious anomalies built by unknown indigenous groups. What gets left out are the compelling theories and evidence suggesting African presence and influence centuries before European contact. Take the Olmec colossal heads in Mexico, monumental stone sculptures dating back to 1500 BCE, featuring distinctly African facial features with broad noses and full lips. Mainstream scholars dismiss this as coincidental or stylized, but the resemblance is undeniable. Meanwhile, in the Mississippi Valley, the Poverty Point site in Louisiana features a massive complex of concentric earthworks dating to 1700 BCE, a time when, according to conventional history, only simple hunter-gatherers inhabited North America. The engineering precision required suggests knowledge that supposedly didn't exist here for another 2,000 years. The famous Bat Creek stone, discovered in a Tennessee burial mound in 1889, bears inscriptions that several epigraphers have identified as Paleo-Hebrew. While controversial, it points to the possibility of transoceanic contact that conventional archaeology refuses to seriously consider. As historian Ivan van Sertima argued in They Came Before Columbus, the currents of the Atlantic could have carried African vessels to American shores, and the archaeological record contains too many anomalies to dismiss this possibility outright. The problem isn't lack of evidence, it's institutional resistance. Archaeology departments, museum curators, and textbook publishers operate within a Eurocentric framework that can't accommodate the idea that Africans might have reached America first, or contributed to its early civilizations. So the earthworks become mysteries, rather than evidence of a more complex global history. This isn't just academic debate. It's about whose achievements get remembered and whose get erased. While mainstream history focuses on slavery, there's another story they rarely tell. The story of black resistance that created independent nations within America's borders. These weren't just runaway slaves hiding in swamps. These were sovereign communities with their own governments, laws, and military defenses that held off European powers for generations. The maroon societies of the Great Dismal Swamp, the Florida Wilderness, and the Appalachian Mountains represented some of the most successful black freedom projects in American history. The concept of marronage, creating independent settlements beyond slaveholder control, existed wherever slavery existed. But in North America, these communities achieved something remarkable. They established diplomatic relations with European powers, traded with neighboring tribes, and maintained their independence for decades. In South Carolina, the maroon fortress of Fort Mose became the first legally sanctioned free black settlement in what would become the United States. Established in 1738, it offered freedom to slaves who escaped from British colonies. This wasn't a hidden camp. It was a recognized military outpost with a black governor and formal status. What made these maroon empires so threatening to the slave economy wasn't just that they offered escape routes. They demonstrated that black people could govern themselves successfully without white oversight. They had functioning economies based on agriculture, trade, and skilled craftsmanship. They developed complex social structures with elected leaders, judicial systems, and cultural traditions that blended African roots with indigenous and European influences. The existence of these communities proved that slavery wasn't natural or inevitable. It was a system that required violent enforcement to maintain. In the Great Dismal Swamp straddling Virginia and North Carolina, Maroons built elevated villages on islands surrounded by treacherous terrain. They constructed sophisticated housing, storage facilities, and even created agricultural systems on floating platforms. These communities weren't temporary hideouts. Some persisted for over a century, outlasting multiple colonial governments. Their very existence challenged the myth of black dependency that slaveholders used to justify their system. When these maroon nations eventually fell, it wasn't because their models failed. It was because expanding American and European empires dedicated massive military resources to destroying them. The historical record then gets rewritten to emphasize the destruction rather than the achievement, making it seem like these experiments in sovereignty were doomed from the start, rather than violently suppressed. Have you heard of Fort Mose or the Great Dismal Swamp Maroons? Drop a comment. Nowhere was the success of black sovereignty more evident than in Spanish Florida during the 18th century. While the British colonies to the north were tightening their slave codes, Spain was actively encouraging the formation of free black settlements as a buffer against British expansion. This created a unique historical moment where African-descended people could build legally recognized communities with land grants, political autonomy, and military authority. Fort Mose wasn't an isolated phenomenon. It was part of a network of settlements that stretched across northern Florida, creating a corridor of black freedom that attracted escapees from the Carolinas and Georgia. The Spanish strategy was brilliant. They offered freedom and land to enslaved people who fled British territory, thereby weakening their colonial rivals while strengthening their own defenses. The residents of these settlements became skilled soldiers, farmers, and craftsmen who proved crucial in defending St. Augustine against British attacks. The black men of Fort Mose fought alongside Spanish troops in the Battle of Bloody Marsh in 1742, helping to secure Spanish control of Florida for another generation. What's particularly revealing is how this history gets minimized even when it's acknowledged. Textbooks might mention Fort Mose as a footnote about the first free black town, but they rarely explore what made it significant. This was more than a town. It was a sovereign community with its own militia, its own leadership structure, and formal recognition from a European power. When Florida became a U.S. territory in 1821, the existence of successful black communities with land ownership and military experience posed a direct threat to the slave-based economy taking root. American officials systematically dismantled these settlements, pressured black landowners to sell their properties, and rewrote the historical narrative to emphasize Spanish colonialism while erasing black agency. Archaeological work at Fort Mose has uncovered evidence of a sophisticated community with mixed African, Spanish, and Native American cultural influences. But funding for these excavations has been minimal compared to sites associated with European colonization. The message is clear. Some histories are worth preserving, while others are convenient to leave buried. The disappearance of these black civilizations from our history books wasn't accidental. It was systematic. There's a pattern to how certain histories get preserved while others get buried. The protocol works through three key filters. Archaeological bias determines what gets dug up and studied. Archival control decides what documents get preserved and accessed. And educational gatekeeping determines what makes it into textbooks. Each filter reinforces the others, creating a system where black sovereignty becomes literally unthinkable because the evidence for it remains buried, restricted, or dismissed as fringe theory. Think about what happens when a society acknowledges that black people built successful independent nations on this soil. It dismantles the myth of black dependency that's been used to justify everything from welfare cuts to mass incarceration. It challenges the idea that black people need white supervision to thrive. Most dangerously, it provides a blueprint for what sovereignty could look like today. That's why the suppression of this history wasn't passive neglect. It was active protection of the racial hierarchy. The rewriting followed a clear formula. First, ignore the evidence. When that became impossible, marginalize it as controversial or fringe. Then, when marginalized communities continued to preserve their histories, attack the credibility of the sources. Finally, create alternative explanations that maintain the preferred narrative. We see this pattern everywhere. With the Mound Builders, first they were mysterious, vanished races. Then their achievements got attributed to every possible group except Africans. With maroon societies, they became temporary hideouts rather than sustained nations. With New Africa, they became radical extremists rather than constitutional founders. The tools of historical suppression are both obvious and insidious. Let's start with archaeology, the science that's supposed to be objective, but has often served political agendas. For decades, archaeological digs focused on European settlements, while indigenous and black sites received minimal funding or attention. When evidence of African presence did emerge, like the controversial Los Lunas Decalogue stone in New Mexico or the Bat Creek stone in Tennessee, the response wasn't curiosity, but dismissal. The scientific establishment treated these findings as anomalies, rather than clues to a more complex history. Archaeological bias operates through what gets studied, how it's interpreted, and who gets to do the interpreting. Then there's archival control, the gatekeeping of historical documents. Many records of black sovereignty exist in scattered archives, often uncatalogued or restricted. The papers of the Republic of New Africa are dispersed across university special collections and government files, making comprehensive research nearly impossible. Meanwhile, records of maroon societies were often destroyed by the governments that suppressed them, or remain in Spanish and French archives that American historians rarely consult. The fragmentation itself becomes a form of suppression. When evidence is hard to access, the history becomes easy to ignore. Educational gatekeeping completes the cycle. Textbook publishers face pressure from state boards to present a unified national narrative. Stories of black kingdoms complicate the straightforward progression from colonization to nationhood. They introduce uncomfortable questions about land claims, reparations, and ongoing sovereignty. So these histories get reduced to footnotes or excluded entirely. The result is that generations learn American history as a story of European expansion, with black people appearing only as problems to be solved. First slavery, then segregation, never as architects of their own destinies. The silence extends beyond textbooks to museums, documentaries, and public monuments. How many Americans have visited a museum exhibit about maroon societies or the Republic of New Africa? How many public schools teach about the black towns of Oklahoma or the Mound Builders' connections to African civilizations? This isn't accidental omission. It's curated ignorance designed to maintain the status quo. Were you taught any of this in school? Comment your experience. Today, we're witnessing something unprecedented, a grassroots movement to reclaim these buried histories. It's not coming from established universities or government institutions. It's happening through community archaeologists digging in local archives, genealogists connecting family stories to broader patterns, and digital activists creating open-source databases of suppressed evidence. Social media has become a powerful weapon against historical erasure. Platforms like TikTok and Instagram allow researchers to share findings that would never make it into academic journals. You'll find threads analyzing satellite images of potential mound sites, discussions of DNA evidence connecting African diasporic communities, and crowdsourced efforts to translate obscure documents. This democratization of knowledge means the gatekeepers are losing control. When a high school student in Louisiana can live stream their visit to a neglected Freedmen's Town site, the silence gets broken in real time. The legal landscape is shifting too. Reparations movements are increasingly grounding their claims in these lost sovereignties. When activists demand land back or economic restitution, they're not just citing slavery. They're pointing to specific black nations that were violently dismantled. The Republic of New Africa's claim to 5 southern states seems less radical when you understand it as reclaiming territory, where black people already exercised sovereignty. Museums are facing pressure to confront their complicity in historical suppression. Institutions that once displayed indigenous artifacts as curiosities are now returning them to descendant communities. The same reckoning is beginning for black historical sites. There's growing recognition that preserving Fort Mose or the Mound Builder earthworks isn't just about archaeology. It's about justice. These places are evidence of what was possible before suppression, and therefore, what could be possible again. The most significant change is happening in how we understand American history itself. The traditional narrative of continuous progress from colonization to democracy is being replaced by a more honest account. One that acknowledges suppression, resistance, and alternative paths that were violently closed off. This isn't about replacing one simplistic story with another. It's about embracing the complexity that's always been there, waiting to be uncovered. If you're liking this content and you want to help us continue to put out videos like this, please leave a subscribe. It really helps us keep digging up the stories they buried. These lost kingdoms aren't just historical footnotes. They're living legacies that shape our present moment. Every time a community fights for land rights or economic autonomy, they're walking in the footsteps of the Mound Builders, the Maroon societies, and the new African revolutionaries. What becomes clear when you study these patterns is that the erasure was the point. It wasn't enough to defeat these kingdoms militarily or politically. They had to be disappeared from memory itself. Because as long as people remember that black sovereignty existed, the question remains, why can't it exist again? That's the dangerous knowledge that textbook omissions and archaeological biases were designed to suppress. The recovery of these histories is more than academic. It's therapeutic. When you learn that your ancestors weren't just victims, but nation builders, it changes your relationship to power. It transforms the story from one of perpetual oppression to one of interrupted sovereignty. An interruption implies the possibility of resumption. The legacy of these kingdoms lives on in every community organization fighting for self-determination, every land trust creating collective ownership models, every effort to build black economic independence. They're not lost anymore. They're waiting to be reclaimed. The evidence is there in the earthworks, the archives, and the oral traditions. The question is whether we have the courage to look. Which lost kingdom should we explore next? Drop your vote in the comments. You learned something new today about the kingdoms they tried to hide? Hit subscribe for more stories they don't want you to know. Share this with someone who needs to understand that black history isn't just about struggle, it's about sovereignty. And if you want to dive deeper into one of these hidden civilizations, watch our next video about the black senators who terrified white America by actually governing. Until next time, remember, the truth buried is power deferred.